and welcome. I'm Faiz Rahman and you're watching Cafe DC. Our guest here is the acting chief envoy to the OIC at the State Department. OIC is of course, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Arslan Sulaiman, thank you very much for joining us again here. Last time you were here, you talked to us as the deputy envoy, and now you're the acting. Rashad Hussain has moved on and has been given another gig, so to speak, by the president. Welcome again.
Thank you so
much. Since we are a little short on time today, I just want to get into the discussion right now. What's your most pressing challenge today? What's going on? I mean, you must have a full plate.
It's absolutely a full plate, and the range of issues that we look at and work on are very broad and a lot of the pressing issues. But I think right now the number one issue that a lot of people are focusing on and we're trying to get a lot of international attention and traction for is the effort to combat violent extremism. And combating violent extremism means addressing the underlying motivators and factors that lead individuals to terrorism, to commit terrorist acts. And so last week the president held a summit here in Washington, D.C. to focus specifically on domestic and international efforts to combat violent extremism. And the summit was an opportunity to bring together leaders at the national, local, and international level from various sectors, from the private sector, from the community sector, from government sector, all around the same topic of what are the best ways to combat violent extremism? What are the ways in which we can improve government interaction and relationships with communities? How can communities be empowered to bring about solutions to these issues that they're facing? How can we work together around this shared challenge? And that was the focus of the summit, and that's the focus of a lot of our follow-up effort to engage bodies like the OIC on efforts that they can contribute to help along this cause, and with our international partners. There were about 65 foreign delegations who came to the summit, and they participated at the State Department in a ministerial, including the UN Secretary General and other senior leaders and ministers from various governments. And so this all started really when the president gave remarks last September at the United Nations General Assembly, where he laid out a vision and a challenge to the international community to really respond to this generational challenge that we're facing.
And you see a continuation of his work towards this goal, right? Starting right after he assumed the office and when he spoke in Cairo, for that matter, that is speech also. Let me enlighten my audience a little bit about OIC. OIC is the second largest international organization after the United Nations, right? And we believe that the United Nations headquarters is in New York. So ambassadors and envoys, basically they go and work in New York. OIC's headquarters is somewhere else, but you're sitting here in Washington. And it's a very large group. Like you're talking about like maybe 57, 58?
57, yeah.
57, and then of course there are some observers.
Right.
India is also, and it probably has an observer status. Or they want to have an...
They have, like the second largest Muslim population in the world, but I don't believe they have official status with the OIC due to some politics with other OIC members.
Exactly. So when you interact with so many countries who are themselves in so many other, smaller societies, and so it's a very difficult thing to do.
Well, it's a really big opportunity, really. The position, it's a relatively young position in our government. It began under President George W. Bush's administration. Last year in his office, he appointed a special envoy to the OIC. And the way that the Obama administration has approached this position is that the president viewed this as a position to deepen and expand the United States' relationships and partnerships with Muslim communities around the world. So when he appointed Rashad Hussain to the special envoy position, he tasked him with following up on a lot of the initiatives that were announced in the president's Cairo speech. And as you mentioned, even in the Cairo speech, the first issue he was talking about in the Cairo speech was violent extremism. But in addition to that, there were a number of other areas, including human rights, women's rights, entrepreneurship, science and technology cooperation, health cooperation, work to eradicate polio, all of these different areas of cooperative initiatives and all of these issues that address common concerns are areas that we try to work and build upon. And so there's a tremendous amount of opportunity, though the challenge is great, to build those bridges and build
sorry
those
to interrupt,
partnerships.
Arslan. One criticism that the United States faces around the world is we interfere too much with people's affairs. For example, Fareed Zakaria wrote this article in Washington Post, and he said that let Muslims deal with this extremism issue, this violence issue, this terrorism issue, and probably the United States just basically sit on the lines and watch and do something where it's necessary. Do you agree?
I think there's certainly areas where the United States can help our partners in different efforts. So for example, in actually dealing with the issue of foreign fighters, where people are traveling across international boundaries to go join a fight somewhere. Certainly international cooperation and the role of the United States is very important there. But when you get to issues about how communities are explaining Islam or talking about Islam or teaching Islam, that certainly is an area that the United States is not well positioned to do anything really specifically, nor should it be. And our laws related to the First Amendment and protecting against an establishment of religion would really preclude us from taking actions that really get into the details of debates amongst Muslims about what Islam is and how Islam needs to be interpreted. So definitely in those types of areas, the government really shouldn't play a role. Not just the U.S. government, but really other governments. Those types of debates are best handled amongst communities and scholars and practitioners or people who follow those religions. So that's certainly the case. However, I do think that in the United States, we have a particular approach and a particular focus to countering violent extremism, which has proven effective, and that we think that is valuable to share with our partners. So the approach that we've developed here in the United States, and in 2011, the White House issued its first ever national strategy to combat violent extremism. It's a community-led approach. It's an approach that focuses on community-generated initiatives, and it focuses on empowering communities to have the space and the ability to act in this area. And internationally, that's really such a critical principle to abide by. Because unfortunately, in a number of countries, including countries that are our partners in counterterrorism and in other areas, there are human rights violations. There are actions that the government takes which restricts the space for civil society, which infringes on freedom of expression and freedom of association. And those types of restrictions often help to drive grievances that individuals use and exploit to lead and to join violent extremist groups. So the approach that protects human rights, the approach that emphasizes the need to develop political space for individuals to exercise their views and to seek civic change in peaceful ways, that's critically important. And that's something that we stress with our partners and that we hope to work on as we continue to work on violent extremism programming.
Arslan, out of this summit, some participants actually also shed light on the root causes of extremism. There were talks about, not just because extremism and violence, it just doesn't begin in a vacuum. There are some causes. So when you go and talk to these people in the Muslim world, when you travel around the world, what are some of the most important concerns or most significant concerns that people bring up in conversations with you?
Absolutely. There's no one path to extremism. There's no one path to radicalization. We don't claim that there is any one blueprint to deal with this or effective or to address the challenge. It's really a multifactorial issue and approach. So when we travel abroad, we try to convey that, that it's really an issue that requires kind of a whole of government and a whole of society approach. It's something that you need to have government involved in order to ensure that they're not creating problems, that they're leaving enough space for civil society to engage and to create positive solutions and creative solutions. You want to make sure that security forces are not conducting operations or activities that are creating grievances amongst the people. You want to ensure that economies are open and vibrant and creating opportunities for people so that people have a channel for their creative energies, both economically and also politically. You want to make sure you have robust education systems that are functioning and provide opportunities for students so that students aren't forced to choose between particular schools that might be giving them a very narrow view of the world. And it's really an issue about discourse, about how the government is fostering an open and tolerant society. And so all of those issues are part and parcel of what we talk about and what we work on with communities abroad. I think some of the function in terms of the news coverage focuses on groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Boko Haram and Taliban because they have had some of the most salient and most violent actions recently of violent extremism.
Some Muslim organizations, they also basically complain that there was just too much focus on the Muslim community and the Muslim communities around the world in this conference, even though extremism is not just one community's and one religion's monopoly.
Right.
So did we address that issue somehow?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, if you hear from participants who are there, I know you had Haris Tareen on your program, he was there, and people have said that in those discussions at the White House, there was certainly a focus on other domestic extremist elements. I think some of the function in terms of the news coverage focuses on groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Boko Haram and Taliban because they have had some of the most salient and most violent actions recently of violent extremist groups. But we are absolutely aware that there are other groups out there that operate. There are Buddhist extremist groups. There are extremist groups in various regions of the world. And it's not just an issue of one religion. And the president was very clear about that in his remarks. He was very clear about saying that some of these groups that claim to be acting in the name of Islam are distorting the religion of Islam. And the vast majority of Muslims, over 99%, have rejected those justifications and have rejected those groups and their actions. And so he was very clear that Islam is not the problem here and it's not an issue of a religion, but that terrorism is caused by people, it's caused by terrorists, and we have to focus on the terrorists, the people who are criminals, the people who go into a school in Peshawar and shoot children. This is really unjustifiable, inexcusable violence, and there's no place for that in society. And you've seen in every country where this has happened, people standing up and saying, enough, these groups have to go. This happened in Pakistan after that incident. This happened in Jordan when the pilot was burned. And this is happening, around the world. And so it's that focus, it's that emphasis about getting people around this common challenge and working together with positive solutions that we're really focusing on.
Arslan, of course, you have a continuity of your work in the department. You have long-term issues, midterm, and then some things just comes up. For example, these kidnappings, the Christian kidnappings in Iraq. How do you deal with that issue? Just to understand a little bit better of the functionality of the department. Do you, as envoy to OIC, is it something that you also address, or you leave it to other folks at state?
Right. Well, there are many offices at state that would work to address this kind of situations. With the OIC office, over the past several years, we've really taken a focus on the plight of religious minorities within Muslim-majority countries, in particular Christian groups. You saw the State Department, Secretary Kerry and the White House strongly condemn the beheading of the Egyptian Coptic Christians and now the kidnapping of the Assyrian Christians that you mentioned. It's a real challenge that we work with the countries involved and we work with the communities involved. And from the OIC level, we've also been working with the OIC to raise these concerns. And to their credit, the Secretary General, Iyad Madani, has been very outspoken in condemning these types of incidents. He had statements condemning these murders and kidnappings, and that's a really positive development in terms of having the OIC speak out and set a norm, a standard that these types of activities are unacceptable. And we've also been working with religious leaders. We've also been working with scholars who are trying to amplify their voice and amplify the teachings of Islam that say that Islam requires Muslims to protect the rights of religious minorities, in particular Christians and Jews who are living in their country. And those types of teachings, unfortunately, have been forgotten by a lot of people. And there are Muslim scholars who are working on reviving those and increasing the amount of understanding about those teachings. And so to the extent we're able to, we try to amplify those voices and give them platforms to be able to spread their message to wider audiences.
One issue that a lot of Muslims and Muslim organizations talk about is not proper representation of their views in the mainstream Western societies and also the media. You just said, there are like scholars, muftis talking about these things, these heinous crimes, and condemning them. But what you hear and what you see on screens is just totally different, as if the huge majority, the actual Muslim world community is just totally doesn't matter. And here are these few extremists who are calling the shots, and that's what the Muslim community is all about. I know the State Department's mandate is not to talk about the domestic issues. You can't go and talk to these people. But is there some effort also on your part while you talk to these scholars and other prominent people in the Muslim world? Is there also an effort on this side of the aisle that yes, they need to be given a little bit more exposure and more prominence in the coverage and in the overall dialogue in the society?
I think you bring up a really great point. It's true that in a lot of these cases, when you have really heinous crimes being committed by these extremist groups, you will hear in the media people say, why haven't the Muslims condemned this? And the truth is they have. They've had in overwhelming numbers. If you just even Google these condemnations, you'll see from prominent scholars, from community organizations, from mosques around the country, around the world, these condemnations. And so it is an issue about educating the media. And I think there are community groups that are working on that are trying to engage with the media and increase their understanding. We don't engage in that type of work directly with the media because that's not really our job. It's their job to do research and to report properly. But there are ways in which we can help affect that discourse. And you saw it very clearly by the president last week in his remarks. He was very clear that Muslims around the world have condemned these groups, have condemn their activities and have called those actions un-Islamic. And so when you hear the president, when you hear Secretary Kerry call these groups un-Islamic, they are echoing the voice of the Muslims around the world. They are raising that voice which has already called these groups and their actions un-Islamic. And that is kind of the voice of the mainstream Muslim world. And so in ways, and through those remarks, we're able to amplify those voices, and also through different platforms where we might have meetings and we invite them, like at the summit. There were a number of religious leaders who were at the summit, domestic religious leaders and others, who are able to use that platform to more fully explain that reality.
You bring up a very good point. Of course, on the one hand, there are complaints by the foreigners, by Muslims around the world, that why don't these media here give us enough coverage? But at the same time, there's not proper understanding of the U.S. structure, so to speak. First Amendment and this, the media being totally independent, and the government not having any control over the media. So do you find that being a big issue, a big problem when you go and meet with these people? Because a lot of people outside this country see America as one monolithic, huge structure, where this just one guy is probably directing everybody else, like a big monarchy or a kingdom.
Right. No, that's a good point. The same way that they may see America as the monolith, there are people in America who may see the Muslim world or Islam as the monolith, and they don't understand the nuances and differences and other things. So it is a point that we have to explain, the independence of our media, the fact that when you allow for a system of freedom of expression where you have the media protected and individuals' right to speak freely protected, then you have a greater scope of voices to speak out against these issues. And we often try to highlight cases in which they might hear about an incident of someone burning a Quran or doing something that's anti-Islamic, and they don't necessarily hear about how the local communities reacted. And so a lot of times we try to explain that, this may have happened, but this is one individual out of, the 300 plus million Americans. And in fact, in the community in which that individual did that, you had Christians, Jews, Buddhists, Hindus coming together and condemning it, standing shoulder to shoulder. So,
but it's also true for the other part. I mean, they're like, in the Muslim world, a few people, making this mischief.
Yes.
And then you have, hundreds of millions of people being blamed for that. So they also see the same thing as a problem.
Absolutely. And so when the president makes remarks like he did last week and the Secretary of State does as well, it's really trying to address that, misconception and try to help educate.
Ruslan, it's a beautiful conversation. Unfortunately, we're out of time. It's so good to see you again.
Great to see you again.
And we wish you all the success in your work and your career.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for watching another episode of Cafe DC.